Good evening, everybody. My name is Charles Chang, and I'm coming to you from Fudan University's Fanhai International School of Finance. Welcome to our online course series brought to you by CGTN Think Tank and the Fudan Finance Review. In this second part of our three-part series, we take a look at how Fintech is going to help to stabilize the economy in this very difficult time during the global health crisis. Today, we're going to talk about how the Chinese economy. And I know there's an awful lot of big and impressive words in that title, revolutionize being not the least of them. But even taking a step back from there, there's a great deal of skepticism around the word Fintech itself. There's a lot of folks that raise eyebrows when we talk about Fintech. And that is all hyperbole. And it's more about science fiction than perhaps about science. And yet for another group of people, there are not enough superlatives to describe what Fintech is going to do for our world and perhaps what it has already done. Lost on me today that I'm coming to you through the airwaves broadcasting globally through CGTN's network. And yet I'm still, got a box of VHS tapes in my house waiting for the VCR to make its revival. In fact, I had never been on Netflix until this crisis began, and that's a $200 billion company. So I get the skepticism. But for me, I think despite that dichotomy, and despite all the hyperbole that already surrounds this industry, perhaps it suffices for us today to look at what's already in front of us. To not talk about 10 or 15 years in the future, but perhaps to realize that Fintech is not so much describing for us the wave of the future as it is already telling us something about the reality of today. It has been a blurry 2020. 4 months ago, as we moved into the new year, people were calling this the year of perfect vision, of perfect foresight, if you will. And yet I think 2020 has been anything but that. And whatever your particular perspective has been and however you've been experiencing this crisis, I think it's touched all of us in very, very profound ways. And despite the world responding with great conviction over the last several months, we are faced with an incredible loss of production in the real economy. A real black swan event. So often we associate black swan with negative impacts, and this is surely one of them. And I think one of the real tragedies of what we're seeing this time is that this crisis is really about the most vulnerable. It's been hitting our small and medium enterprises disproportionately toughly. Surveys are showing now that 2/3 of all SMEs globally may have only a few months left of cash to run. So as we track into this difficult time, I think hope springs not too much before the COVID crisis began. Back in October, President Xi urged here in China that blockchain be a core technology driving innovation going forward, and that the industry should think, of course, about the hardware development, but also about applications, about software development, about policy and regulation reform, to bring blockchain into the very, very forefront of the future of China growth going forward into the next 2 decades. Not long after that, in November, the People's Bank of China Vice Chairman Fan further proclaimed that in accordance with its years-long work into digital currency and electronic payment, so-called DCEP, that it had completed its design phase and that the digital currency for China was ready for testing. Now let's be careful when we say, what do we talk about? So there's 2 acronyms, the DCEP, that means the digital currency and the electronic payment platforms. And what I call the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, to differentiate that from all of the other currencies that we may see out there, including, of course, the cryptocurrencies. And the CBDC, I think, is important and it's unique. As with any other sovereign currency, this currency is meant to be a unit of account. That is, when we go out and buy a loaf of bread, we know that it costs $1.99. We don't think of it as 1/10,000th of a Bitcoin. We think of it as $1.99 in a numeraire that we understand. Further, it should be a store of value, right? We put $1 as a legal tender in our pocket, and we expect to be able to spend it anywhere we like with the United States, or an RMB, anywhere we like within China, and it should be worth the same thing. Finally, of course, it should be a medium of exchange. It should be something that everyone can accept and that everyone can agree upon and say, this is worth what we all think it's worth. So a currency is a very, very special asset, and a term not to be used lightly. And as we move forward with the stimulus of these economies today, we look at the CBDC as a possible weapon, a possible tool for us to use to restart our economies. And China is the first of the G20 countries to launch its central bank digital currency. But it certainly won't be its last. It's among the first in the world, but other countries like Thailand, and even recently in the past few weeks, South Korea, have announced that they're going to move forward with their own central bank digital currencies. So in contrast with existing systems, I think it's worth understanding for a moment that what we're doing now today is using perhaps an electronic form of the regular currency, and we're using financial institutions to trade that currency. And the financial institutions play a role, for example, in the real-time gross settlement system or in SWIFT, where they broker the exchange of these currencies also through electronic means. But what the CBDC is aiming to do is to be an actual form of individual payment with direct clearance, with the stated goal of replacing M0. And for those of you who don't know, M0 is cash. That's what it means. It's the actual cash in your pocket and in the bank sitting in a safe. And the idea here is that CBDC is replacing that. So it's not just a mechanism that connects banks in a new way. We've already got those mechanisms. Rather, it's a new innovation that makes currency itself fully transferable. And that's an important differentiation, that it's aiming to actually replace M0. Now, November was a few months ago, and as things happen in this field in hyperspace speed, on March the 24th, the People's Bank further announced to have completed the development of the currency's basic functions and to have moved on now into the testing phase. And as these things work, 13 hours after I completed these slides, we began to have announcements, first in Suzhou in China, and then in Shenzhen, in Chengdu, and even in the Xiong'an Special District, that there are now test sites ready to go to use the CBDC. So why do we want to use CBDC? Why is this now important moving forward into the new economy? The first of these reasons is the transaction efficiency. So let's think about why there are banks in the first place. Well, the first reason has got to be that it's safe, right? That you don't want to put money under your bed. It gets lost, it rots, okay? It disappears, it gets burned, it gets broken, gets destroyed, and now you've lost that money. So we put the money in the bank and it's safe there. And there's some custodial responsibility on the part of the bank to keep it safe there. And that's something we pay for. We know that banks will use that money and make loans, but we're willing to allow them to do that. And we pay them fees to do so, but that's okay because we get something in return. And that storage is an important piece of that. And the handling as well, right? We have an ATM card. It's convenient for us to be able to go to an ATM machine and take money out there without having to go talk to a teller and so forth. And so costs of handling and storing are an important part of what allows banks to run, but it's a cost for us, Joe consumer, every day. Importantly as well, the new digital currency, because it will be all controlled digitally, will be able to track this money as it's spent. And we'll be able to encrypt this money in a brand new way. So when we look at these beautiful coins, these collector's coins here on the slide, wasn't that long ago, less than 100 years ago, that these were the state of the art. That there were pictures on here and that there was a special material and a special weight to that currency that told us this was real. And then beyond that, we started to have paper money, and in there were pictures embedded. And then later on, even special threads and so forth embedded in that currency to help us know these are real or not. But of course, the counterfeiters keep up just as quickly. Now, as we, of course, have been in the digital world for many years, we have an incredible science of encryption that can be billions, trillions, quadrillions of different kinds of cryptographies that make it nearly now impossible to engage in counterfeitism. And all of those things are gross losses in the system that can now be avoided. Beyond this, we look at stats now from the Bank of England that have come out and said that a CBDC issuance of 30% of annual GDP could raise GDP permanently by 3% due to the reductions in these market frictions. Okay, keeping in mind that many of the most developed countries would love to grow at even 2.5% or 3%, this is a really significant number that I think many economies would love to have. And as we go farther into that, and we'll talk about it in a moment, the ability to track this, the ability to stop unscrupulous behavior, to make sure that the use of capital is what we thought it was, but in a real-time way, not to find the ill uses and then go backwards to fix these problems. We'll be able to track it in a real-time way going forward. And that's an incredible innovation as well. Beyond that efficiency, when we're now talking about tracking, now we're talking about risk reduction. We're talking about being able to use this currency in a way that reduces systematic risk across the financial systems to everyone's benefit. So let's just take a few possible examples. Digital payment is not new. There are already different kinds of digital payment that we can do. Of course, here in China, the one we all use is WeChat and Alipay, and this is to take nothing away from them. As I was walking into my building today, I pulled out my wallet to swipe my card, and I saw 320 RMB in that wallet. And it struck me that that 320 RMB has been in my wallet probably for 18 months or more. You know, because who spends cash anymore? And then sometimes we travel and we go and we sit on a cab or a taxi, and they turn around and they say, "Sir, where's your payment?" And, I haven't paid for a ride in cash in months. Okay? So these new cashless payment options are, of course, very, very important to our economy. But let's take stock for a moment that 96% of all cashless payment in online retail and online payment in China is done by WeChat and Alipay. CBDC would allow all banks, all financial institutions ostensibly to engage in the online payment industry. It would allow us to do it in a virtually cost-free way and engage this industry in competition it's not seen. Of course, passing then on the fruits of that competition, improve service, lower fees across the board to all of our users. Keeping in mind also that any payment done through a corporation, whether that corporation be big or small, still has as part of it a possibility of that corporate default risk. And as we look at a lot of the folks that recently been talking about digital currencies and Libra has been in the news, and Facebook is, of course, a multi-hundred billion dollar firm, and we would never suspect that would go away. But as we compare that with the responsibilities and fiduciary ones of a sovereign nation, then we can really start to grasp what a sovereign digital currency might mean in terms of not just its ability to back the money going perpetually into the future, but also the ability then to appropriately monitor this money, to regulate it in important ways, and to enforce compliance upon the users of that money that maybe a corporate wouldn't be able to do. Very important here as well is the issue that it needs to be a stable unit of account. And when we talk about a stable unit of account, the story of some early Bitcoin miners who didn't know the value of Bitcoin and used Bitcoin to buy a pizza that ultimately, in hindsight, probably cost them 50,000 US dollars or more, it reminds us how important a stable unit of account is in terms of using this as an everyday transactional currency. Now we get into our main concern of the day, is of the most vulnerable, and very important here that the CBDC really addresses those the most, and those are the SMEs and the low-income households. Let's first talk about SMEs. SMEs are the building block to any economy. That's where the innovation is happening. That's where the entrepreneurship is happening. That's the lifeblood of growth. But they will incur relatively higher costs when it comes to cash and payment processing. Think Visa, MasterCard, and those sorts of fees. Think also that the digital RMB will support these very small, potentially, transactions. We're talking about your street vendors. You're talking about your neighborhood flower shop, and their ability to do the same kind of payment processing that McDonald's, Starbucks, and so on can do. And keep in mind that when we talk about listed corporations, we're talking about a few thousand of them here in China. When we talk about SMEs, we're talking about tens of millions of them that benefit from the efficiencies and the cost reductions that are associated now with a sovereign digital currency. Particularly in China, as we sit here today, many are obligated to rely heavily upon shadow banking, which have, of course, increasing and larger costs and risks with multiple middlemen involved that are taking rents. And then we think about, in those cases, even more obvious benefits from the transparency and the effective regulation, really releasing the power of all of the capital market to these SMEs, rather than have them funnel through and be bottlenecked within the largest institutions. As we talk about low-income households, The UN has admirably been pushing forward and advocating for the Sustainable Development Goals. But you may not know Sustainable Development Goals are not all about the environment, be it that the environment, of course, very important. But a number of our Sustainable Development Goals also specifically talk about financial inclusion being part of that sustainable growth. And as we look to China, surveys show that about 800 million citizens, mostly rural, still rely heavily upon cash and have low accessibility to banking services. The CBDC set up to be purpose-specific digital wallets. What that means, the technical word is, what does that mean? That means that this digital currency survives without the need for bank accounts, that they're able to be traded like regular cash directly from phone to phone. I can hold my phone up, put it next to yours, and we can trade money right there. We don't need internet. We need kinds of financial services and credit and so forth that we do, here in Shanghai, really radically increasing the access to basic financial services. This would be entirely free. You wouldn't need an Alipay account. You wouldn't need to be connected to SWIFT. You'd be able to do this directly from phone to phone. Beyond that, the programmability, and we'll talk a little bit about that, of these digital assets. Because they're digital, they'll be able to be programmed, and we can program interest into these, not now coming from the bank, but coming directly from the currency itself. And these interest-bearing notes have the opportunity to be used for microloans and for credit facilities and for savings that we've never had before. So now as we look back to crisis and we look back to 2008 and that big financial crisis feels like we just walked out of, keep in mind that that was a credit crisis. And during that time, there were a number of the banks, and we said, with all these defaults, are you going to be able to pay me? If I go and look for money in my bank account, is it still going to be there? And that crisis of trust, that loss of confidence, was really what drove us into that credit crisis in 08 and 09. And the response at that time was QE to say, look, let's ensure the solvency of these banks. Let's let the consumers feel comfortable that these banks will still be around tomorrow, and we'll provide liquidity so that they can continue to make loans, and that'll give the economy, the confidence that it needs. Still, even then, corporations took the opportunity to take that low-cost credit and buy back stocks and take excessive leverage. The airline industry alone received $39 billion in government support during the credit crisis QE, only to have spent it on stock buybacks and now find themselves asking for an additional $50 billion in bail. Now come to the day. The COVID crisis wasn't about banking. It wasn't about structured products. It really hit our real economy. It hit consumption. It's hitting earnings. It's hitting wages, and it's really, really, really slamming our employment. United States has lost 22 million jobs in unemployment over the past month. Feels like every week it's a new record. 22 million jobs, by the way, is basically the entirety of job gains in the last 10 years. Goldman Sachs further projects that second quarter gross domestic product in the United States will decline 11% from a year ago and 35% from last quarter. And the huge stimulus packages are coming, 2.2 trillion in the United States, 1 trillion in Japan. And these stimulus programs are supposed to come with restrictions against investing in speculation and high yield lending. But how do you do that? The central bank digital currency can be programmed for specific uses. It won't allow you to use that money to go buy back stock or to speculate in real estate. The Paycheck Protection Program that was supposed to help small and medium enterprises in the United States has all but ground to a halt. Lawmakers are calling it, quote, a stampede of applications with lenders who are, again, quote, taking advantage of the crisis. And I think we all can look at that and say all of the best intentions, unfortunately, rendered moot by the execution against something that a programmable central bank digital currency could take care of. Furthermore, because it is not pseudonymous, because it is still dependent on a system, even these digital stimulus packages are limited by people who have accounts with those banks that have been given the mandate to put that money through the system. In fact, banks not registered with the Small Business Administration in the United States cannot pay out the Paycheck Protection Program that's supposed to be guaranteed for everybody. And then we look at individuals. 40% of Americans would struggle to pay an unexpected $400 cost. That was before the crisis. So how much in lost wages would trigger that 40%? How much in unexpected medical costs would trigger that 40%? If we had that CBDC, we will be able to direct relief directly to individual wallets that would be earmarked for the critical consumption. And that could happen instantaneously where people need it absolutely the most. Okay. Again, this could have restrictions against speculation, could have restrictions against uses like gambling and so forth that would really be able to protect the taxpayers who are really needing this money to be used towards critical consumption. And furthermore, even in more normalized times, using this kind of directed relief, particularly with interest-bearing CBDC, could be used as a monetary policy tool, providing for business cycle stabilizations as well. The US has gone a different direction, has decided to go through traditional checks and tax refunds. In fact, some Congress people had put up the idea of allowing us to use digital wallets as an alternative to traditional checks and tax refunds. Unfortunately, did not make it into the bill in Congress, United States. China now has that opportunity with its new CBDC to deliver on that promise. One more additional note that I'd like to bring up today is on the Belt and Road. During this crisis time, US dollars have become dear. Because of an ultra flight to quality, people are choosing to invest in US dollars as the last resort. And so US dollars have become very dear, but the countries who need financing the most, perhaps those with the weaker currencies, are finding it very, very, very difficult to go ahead and raise that capital. An RMB CBDC, particularly along our Belt and Road projects and partnerships, could be a real powerful tool for financing during these most difficult times. Once again, it could be executed through digital wallets and stay in those digital wallets, ostensibly staying out of, if necessary, the local banks, obviating the need for foreign exchange concerns, streamlining SMEs who may not have the ability to trade in currency and hedge in currency the way that our largest corporations might. These transactions, once again, when we talk about Belt and Road, impact upwards of 2/3 of the world's population, many of them in its most fragile economies, and upwards of 40% of the world's GDP. And so the positive impacts of CBDC aren't limited to just China. They could really be part of an entire regional and even global solution. And I think important to say today that the G20 have also begun discussions about how do we create a global stable coin. In conclusion, I'd like to come back to where we started from. Digital is a word that some people in my generation, well, it was a buzzword 30 years ago. Didn't mean a lot. All I really knew of digital was the clock that didn't have hands on it. Today, everything is digital, and it's obvious to us. China's digital economy was about 26 trillion RMB in 2017, estimated to be 120 trillion by 2035. Goldman Sachs predicts that digital finance will increase emerging market GDPs by 3.7 trillion US dollars by 2025, only 5 short years from now. To give some idea of scale, 3.7 trillion US dollars is the size of Germany, or effectively the entirety of Africa. So the digital economy is upon us. It's not on the way, it is here today. And I'll leave you with the final thought that I want to give credit to my colleague at FISF, Michael Song, who always teaches us that as email revolutionized communication by digitizing posts, as the internet revolutionized trade by digitizing commerce, so shall CBDC revolutionize the financial market by digitizing money. I want to thank CGTN for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts today. And I want to thank you guys all for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Professor Chang, for that very enlightening presentation. My name is Michael Wong. I host the Global Business Program here on CGTN. We're coming to you live from Beijing. We're now entering our free discussion part where we've got 3 guests who are going to debate the conversation with Professor Chang about what they just heard. In Moscow, we've got Mark Sloboda, who is an international relations analyst. Right here in Beijing, we've got Edgar Perez, who is a futurist and author, as well as the CEO of MrEdgarPerez.com. And then also in New Delhi, we've got Professor Swaran Singh, professor at the School of International Studies of Jawaharlal Nehru University. Welcome to you all. This is a free discussion, of course, so feel free, gentlemen, to jump in anytime you want. I won't be moderating questions. But Mark, how about we start with you? Give us some thoughts in terms of what you just heard from Professor Chang. You're the furthest away. Let's give the first question to you.
Okay, well, I think a big point of this whole conversation, I think everyone agrees that this global coronavirus pandemic is going to be a watershed moment for the adoption of Fintech, particularly financial apps, payment apps, and so on, and technology in general, as people start to shift to a remote work and social distancing norms develop. And a lot of it, the future of it, depends on how we're predicting this crisis will move forward, both on the ground with actual numbers of infections and recovered, and in the economy, how the economy will deal with it. I think one of the problems is a lot of people are counting on a V-shaped peak and fall in the number of infections, that this will be we'll go into lockdown, we'll come out of lockdown, and it will be over. And similarly, a V-shaped recovery for the economy, where the economy will go down and then zoom back up again, and we'll go back to business as normal. And unfortunately, the medical science is telling us that to expect something completely different, that I think the markets are not taking into account, and that this is going to come in waves. This will peak and ebb and peak and ebb as it spreads around the world, as it becomes perhaps a seasonal virus, as there may be long-term effects for those severely affected by the infection. It may start to have serious effects on them. And we may see countries exit and enter and exit and enter all sorts of restrictions again and again. Stop is going to play havoc on our economies and societies in general, but is a possible boom towards fintech businesses as we start to adopt these lifestyles a year from now, 2 years from now. It may continue longer than that.
Charles, were you able to hear Mark's question? I think he was talking about the urgency of perhaps trying to get fintech as a solution to try and mitigate some of the economic impacts of COVID-19, because he was talking about we could see a resurgence of this virus again as a seasonal matter. It could come in and come out again. What do you think?
No, I think I agree with that. I think the urgency is clearly here, and I think we're seeing that being pushed forward. I mean, for nothing else, let's just talk about, not wanting to just be transferring cash around from hand to hand going through this economy. I think absolutely I agree with that. And I think that's why we're trying to push forward with it. I think it might be the case that, a lot of folks look at this and say, well, why aren't we placing, more of our focus on sort of reviving the traditional pieces in our economy? But where I think I agree totally with Mark is that, here's an opportunity for us to actually make good on the efficiencies that are already here. Here's an opportunity for us to move beyond the draconian and upgrade those systems like we already have today, using this online platform to talk and teach. Right now that we can already do it, but shouldn't we be doing it all the time? So I think I agree with that comment in terms of saying, here's an opportunity for us to adopt, and of course we should be doing it, and why then move back once we've gotten there.
Professor Singh, I want to bring you into the conversation, if you can hear me, because India has tried to go through its own demonetization process. Perhaps you could give some thoughts in terms of how fintech is developing in India and what you heard from Professor Chang. Professor Singh, can you hear me? Okay, we're going to try and get back to Professor Singh in a bit, but Edgar, what do you think? Jump in with your thoughts.
Well, first of all, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Well, I think it's, as my colleagues mentioned, this is a great opportunity for the world to move ahead. If you look at a recent study by McKinsey, 2.5 billion people, adult people in the world, still don't have a bank account. So that's just to give you an idea, the potential for now to use fintech to actually provide the financial inclusion we've been promising for many decades to people who definitely will benefit from these opportunities. So the fact, as the professor mentioned, that we are now speaking using technology and reaching to millions of people around the world means that there are other opportunities too in many other industries. Today, a Chinese company is able to deliver products in California without contact. And I think that's a great opportunity for many other industries as well.
Professor Chang, it seems like this might revolutionize not only the economy overall, but it seems like revolutionizing monetary policy transmission is what I gather from what you're saying.
I think you're exactly right. When we talk to the UN SDG group about, uses of blockchain, I think that's one that they brought up really right away that I think Edgar really struck upon. And that is that here's opportunities for financial inclusion that we just haven't seen. And one part of financial inclusion, I want to say, is also being in the growth of the country. So when we think about the traditional way, right, used to be that the sovereign or the largest corporations would go about doing the development. So, okay, we'll put in the power plant. And once we put in the power plant, the industry will come. And then the big industries will then they'll go out, they'll hire, a Joe factory worker and then give them a part. And it slowly trickles down, right? So every, say, $1,000 of government subsidy that's put out there for development, maybe 20 of those dollars end up in the pockets of the rank and file. And here we've got an opportunity with the fully digitized economy and through the power of blockchain and fractional ownership to do ecosystem financing, where you don't have to have $100 million to go build a power plant. You can have $100 and buy 1/1,000,000th of a power plant. And then engage yourself in the growth of that local economy and benefit then when it, when it grows up and brings you along with it. And so we can move out of that old cycle where those people who have the most money then in turn invest that money in growth industries or in growth economies, and in turn get even more money. Of course, the wealthiest, and are able to say, hey, let's get those local economies involved in fractional ownership, allow them then to be included in the growth of that economy going forward.
I'm going to try and see if we can bring in Professor Singh into the conversation. Professor Singh, can you hear us? If you can, wave to us. No, it still seems like we can't connect with Professor Singh. But Mark, I want to get to you because you did raise some eyebrows when Charles was talking about skepticism in terms of fintech. Are you skeptical about this, or is this a double-edged sword? What are you seeing over in Russia?
Yeah, I think there's a double-edged sword to this, in that even within fintech, due to the enormous economic damage that is being done to all of our economies by the pandemic, even within fintech, there will be winners, but there will also be losers. And I think we need to maybe move the conversation to discussing some specific businesses and applications of financial technology to identify those that will benefit the most and those that will lose out from this crisis. And I'm thinking, specifically, if we take simply a look along the development level, financial technology apps that already had a firm grounding are obviously will have a chance to succeed. While anything that's still in the startup phase and still requires developmental capital will obviously not survive. Similarly, I mean, if you take a look at specific features, anything that involves digital or mobile banking, I think is going to succeed. Anything that has to do with fraud detection, online fraud detection, is going to be a booming business. Anything that deals with financial software for online brokerages and online trading, that will move forward in a very positive way. Well, simultaneously, any type of payment systems that require on volume transaction, because of the huge blow to consumption in general, is going to see their profits, their numbers go down. Anything that it uses financial technology for point-on-point sales, obviously, no one is going to be using those services within retail stores and so on, with these lockdowns and various forms of quarantine and so forth. So I throw it back to you and say, what do you see as the winners and losers in financial technology as we go forward into a kind of a corona world?
Yeah, no, I what an astute comment. What an astute comment. I think absolutely, every time we come upon, so I mean, really, I think two sides of it. I think every time we come upon these quantum leaps in technology, there is a haves and have-nots conversation. The advent of industrialization, what did that do to the artisan? The advent of computers, what did that do to machinists? Right. So absolutely. And I think that's something that we have to be mindful of. I think when I think about the call it the social good, as I was speaking about a moment ago, I think when we talk about reducing costs and we're talking about increasing efficiency, putting aside which companies may or may not benefit as a result of that, I think it's still clear, though, that the users benefit from it. And I think that in terms of, the noble ends, if you will, of it, is certainly one way to read it. And, so I'll use the example of online trading. A good friend of mine was engaged with E-Trade some many years ago, right? And that was a multi-billion-dollar business. Basically the first group of folks that were, doing online trading, and that really killed the offline broker. And they made, gobs and gobs of money, let's just say, right? And then, of course, the internet economies and the commoditization of that technology, pretty soon they killed each other. And now, we don't talk about any brokerage firms, bragging about we can do online trading, it's a given, right? That's just there now. So I think it's quite natural, and I think a great point to point out that anytime you've got these new technologies come along, that that's going to be a replacement process. But I also want to think, though, that in addition to the fact that it generates a social surplus for the users, there is also the additional new services that are there that we're going to start seeing that are providing those new services, right? Banking for token offerings, for example. The opportunity, for example, within wealth management, where you used to have $1 million to get decent advice from Morgan Stanley, and now because of the ability to use robo-advisors and the AI bringing down the cost of that, maybe that service is now affordable and for the banks to offer to more people. And now maybe instead of needing to have $1 million, now maybe you only need to have $10,000 and get the same level of services there. So I think it's absolutely well taken. That in general, when we have these leaps and bounds in technology, that there's going to be that transitioning process. And I think what COVID does, and again, very, very astutely pointed out, is it magnifies those things.
So when we talk about helping people right now, I'm going to throw this out to everyone. Because we can deposit checks directly to folks using these central bank digital currencies, is it time perhaps you guys think to revisit the conversation of some kind of universal basic income, some kind of basic income right now? Would that be possible with CBDCs? Does it make that more of a reality? Should we be considering more about that during this pandemic? Edgar, I'm going to throw it to you first real quick, and then we'll get Professor Chang, Mark, and hopefully Professor Singh on this as well. Edgar, what do you think?
Thank you. Well, I think it's a very important possibility. If you remember, only a few weeks ago, we have a number of candidates to the US presidency speaking about universal income. Andrew Yang actually sponsored this idea for many months, and definitely it's something that now, with the payments that the company, most of employees in America are receiving, definitely it's actually proving its worth. I think just one payment right now of $1,200 for each American at this moment is not going to be enough. 1 month from now, people will want another payment, and maybe another one also the month after, depending how far this pandemic will continue. So yes, I think it's now the time to think about, in this critical situation, to consider such possibility.
Professor Chang, what do you think?
Well, again, I think Mark very, very astutely pointed out there that's exactly one of the uses, because this isn't going to be a V-shaped response. This is going to be a wave-like response. It's going to ebb and flow as we recover, maybe over the course of several years. And as Edgar correctly pointed out, so it's not going to be V-shaped. It's also not a one-time stimulus that's going to do it. So that's point number one. But I think point number two, very importantly, is in the tech. And that's the ability to track, the ability to say, okay, I'm going to give you this universal income, but you're not going to take this to Vegas. And there's a way for us to be able to limit that now, because we've got this programmable CBDC. I'm not going to allow you to spend it on on illegal opioids. I'm not going to allow you to spend it on this and that. I'm going to track where it goes. I'm going to be able to make sure there isn't fraudulent activity going in there. So I think the ability for us to the additional monitoring, the lack of that fraudulent behavior, it at least makes universal income more valuable, in that there are fewer losses and fewer frictions to be worried about. Now, again, whether we do it or not at all is a matter of philosophy and different principle. But I think it at least makes it more effective, and it reduces some of the cost of fraud that we might be afraid of, that's stopping us from doing it in the first place. And a lot of those concerns, I think, are allayed once you have this CBDC in place.
Mark? Mark, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hope that universal basic income is the silver lining of the Corona cloud, or the genie let out of the bottle, granting us wishes that can't be shoved back into it. I think universal basic income has to be recognized as a socialist band-aid being put on a global neoliberal capitalist society in a moment of crisis that it is obviously not capable of handling on its own. There are, no venture capitalists in a foxhole like this, if you want to put it that way. We all need socialism. We need a little bit of restoration of socialism to keep our capitalist economy going. And universal basic income is that. And at the most basic survival level, it may help to address the absolutely astronomical and sinful inequality that exists within our societies, particularly in the first world and somewhat in the second world. I think that Spain has already given some indication. They're the first ones taking a step forward, but they won't be the last. And there's already at least political statements going out saying that this isn't going to be reversed, that this is going to perhaps be permanent. Even the United States handing out a measly $1,200 to citizens who could have even seen that as a possibility just a few months ago when Andrew Yang was running as presidential candidate, raising it as kind of a crazy idea, the way most people perceived of it. And here in Russia right now, the government is seeming to fight tooth and nail. Well, at least the finance ministry is seeming to fight tooth and nail against the idea of adopting that. But as I think it likely that Russia will signal into another month of lockdown through May, I think the government is going to have to seriously consider that, if not universal, then at least for the most vulnerable members of our society. Again, simply at a survival level.
All right, great points. I'm going to try and bring in Professor Singh. Professor Singh, if you could hear us, feel free to join into the conversation and then give us your thoughts on what you've heard so far. Well, we were talking about in terms of how fintech could potentially be used to minimize sort of the economic fallout from COVID-19. I'm not sure if you were able to listen to Professor Chang's presentation there, but feel free to jump in with your thoughts in terms of how financial technology could help perhaps stabilize the economy. I mean, India, your country, went through a demonetization process, or at least tried to do so back in 2016. Perhaps you can draw in some of your experiences from there as well. It seems like we lost Professor Singh again. So hopefully this is all going to be better once 5G is rolled out around the world. Yeah, Edgar, what did you want to say?
Well, I wanted to follow up on the point that I mentioned about technology.
Yeah.
As you know, I'm the author of the Speed Traders. And that speed trading, high frequency trading, is one of the reasons why we don't have any traders now in the New York Stock Exchange. If you remember, only 10 years ago, that was full of people in the pits over there. You would see hundreds of traders there day in, day out, working there, trading shares for all Americans, all companies. And now, guess what? Nobody's there. Imagine if we had something like that in these times. People would have been getting sick day in and day out right there. Nonetheless, the trading didn't stop. As you know, we continue trading, but now the trading is electronic. So that's example of technology. Financial technology is progress. I think nobody would disagree that automobiles created benefits for mankind. At the beginning, some people complain. Imagine if you own thousands of horses providing services, transportation services. But now we know that's the direction. So fintech, as Professor mentioned in his presentation, definitely is the way to go. And I think that's the way to provide benefits to many other people who will still, as Mark mentioned, still need to be served by the capitalism most societies live with today.
Professor Chang, when you're researching China's CBDC, talk to us about the process. I mean, this does seem like a gradual process, right? Policymakers are not trying to introduce this in a very quick or speedy manner. I mean, we're worried about perhaps the disintermediation of commercial banks. We don't want to create excessive financial instability by introducing something new like this, which would definitely not be helpful to the world's most vulnerable, not helpful to China's most vulnerable.
Well, yes, I think China is about all things in moderation. That's in fact what the word 中国 means, right? The Middle Kingdom. And that's true here too. I think one of the great successes of the Chinese planned economy is in fact that, DCEP is not something that we just started talking about in October. It's been something China has had in the lab for 4 and 5 years and have been working on for a long time now. And it's being rolled out intentionally in a planned way. This isn't, hey, you guys can go do it, everybody give it a shot. That's not what we're seeing here, right? This is, okay, we've got 4 places that have been selected for strategic and risk management reasons. We have Xiong'an, not surprisingly close to Beijing, within arm's reach, but not Beijing itself, mind you, right? We couldn't have the capital be an experimental laboratory, of course. We've got Shenzhen, which is the new sort of frontier of finance and technology. That's a really sort of reasonable place to get it started. Suzhou, just outside of Shanghai, again, very, very reasonable. Chengdu, sort of the gateway to Belt and Road through the Western China. Again, I think these are all very purposeful. They're all very, very strategic. And it isn't going to be, okay, now you can do it, everyone just go and try and see what happens. It's done in a very, very measured sort of way. So we're starting to see, and again, this isn't by accident, the term, test site, sandboxes, these sort of places where we're going to see very, very measured uses. So, for example, the Suzhou use of the what we're reading and at least in the media is that the Suzhou use will be specifically in transportation coupons. Okay, so we're not putting this thing directly into the supermarket and making this a $1 trillion business off the top. We're saying, okay, we're going to apply this thing to transportation coupons. Okay, and then we'll see how that works when we introduce it to the system. We're going to move forward in a stepwise manner. And in terms of the blockchain system network across the country, it's the who's who, it's the biggest players, the most important technology firms in the country, all getting together to be involved. And even in the CBDC, it's a 2-tier system. It's People's Bank of China through policy banks, then unto the economy. So it's all being done in a very, very measured way. And that's not surprising. That's been how China has gone about all of its financial reforms going back over the last 30 years. So I expect that to be the way we do this. And as you said, it's going to be in a very, very measured way.
I'm going to ask you all one final question before we open it up to our online audiences who have questions for all 3 of you as well. Just in terms of the significance of the first central bank introducing a digital currency, perhaps walk our audience through what that perhaps means. Feel free, anybody, to join in. Mark, what do you think? The significance of a central bank, the first central bank to introduce a digital currency?
Well, I think the fact of looking at who it is, right? We're looking at what is by many means the largest economy in the world now. It will have imitation, knockdown, ripple effects on everyone else. Maybe not immediately, and much will depend on the success of it. But I don't see anything but success moving forward. So I think that in very short order, we will see at least the majority of the first work within the next.
Okay, it seems like we're having audio issues with Mark. So Professor Chang, I want to come back to you real quick, and then Edgar, feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Mark was saying.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see all the first tier countries getting involved in this. Again, China is not alone. Again, South Korea has already made its announcement. United States has been talking about digital dollar. Former head of the CFTC, Christopher Giancarlo, actually made that a speaking point in Davos this year, in proposing his own form of the digital dollar in the United States. So that's going to happen in short form, short order. I think what's special is, again, as Mark pointed out, the size of the Chinese economy and such a big player getting involved so early, I think really raises the stakes for everybody else. I'll also make one extra point, and that is that once we have this sort of widespread major digital currency, what will be interesting to watch is what's going to happen to crypto, to the rest of those crypto currencies. And I think, I read a quote somewhere today that said, March 24th, which was, the first day that they started doing the test sites, March 24th as the beginning of the end for cryptocurrencies. So I think it's going to have major ripple effects all over the world.
Wow, the beginning of the end of cryptocurrencies. That's also a very interesting statement. Professor Chang, I think this question is going to be great for you. Are we into recruiting season already at the Fanhai School? Are we there?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So we have actually a question from Facebook. This person is a student majoring in finance, actually, and he or she wants to ask, how will fintech change their careers? I mean, will it be harder to find a job in, perhaps, I would assume, finance with the admin in fintech? And does that mean students now in finance have to learn programming in order to get a job in the industry? What do you think?
I'll answer it by saying fintech is your job. Okay. Fintech is a term we use today because we didn't have a term for it before, so we call it fintech. Fintech is finance. In short order, all of finance will be fully engulfed in what we're calling fintech today. In 10 years, it's just going to be called finance. Okay, it's not going to be some special term anymore. So absolutely, fintech is the future. It is your career. So be prepared for it. Now, does that mean you have to be a programmer? No, not everyone works at Apple is a telecom engineer either, right? So I think you're going to have a new sensibility. You're going to have to know how you fit into the world. You're going to have to know, how does the world now interface with you in a different way than it did before? And there will be new jobs and new expertises that are important. But it doesn't mean, like I said, just like you don't have to be a software engineer to work at Apple, you certainly don't have to be a Python programmer to work at a financial institution. It's just learning how to interface with the world in a new way.
And then we have another question online asking, the central bank is going to pilot the DCPE program in Suzhou, among other cities as well, Chengdu, I believe, Shenzhen as well, in the Xinjiang new area. So what is the difference between DCPE and Alipay, and will salaries be digitized in the future? Is it safe? I think safety always comes up when we talk about fintech. Professor Chang, how about we start with you again, then we can get Edgar into the conversation as well.
That's why it's a sovereign currency. In fact, I would say it the opposite way. Would you like to be paid in Bitcoin as an alternative, right? Not knowing if that same one Bitcoin is going to be worth $10,000 or $5,000, right? I think the whole reason why CBDC is so critically important is that you could get paid in that CBDC, and you could be willing to do so because of all of the guarantees that it comes with, that it's sovereign, that it won't go away, that it will have a consistent value, that it will be a unit of account, and so on and so forth, that it will be honored by all vendors. So I think that's number one. The number two, the difference between Alipay and CBDC, very simply, is Alipay is a custodian of regular RMB. They didn't issue RMB. They didn't make RMB out of clear blue sky. Only PBOC can do that. So you should think of Alipay as a big service provider that is still nonetheless using the currency of the day, which of course is issued by the People's Bank, whereas CBDC is itself that currency. It isn't beholden to anyone. It's not beholden to Alipay. It's not beholden to WeChat. It's not beholden to Swift. Is not beholden to any of those infrastructures in the same way that the RMB in your pocket goes to another person. It's not beholden to you either. So I think the critical way to think about it is Alipay is a business that uses RMB as its business entity, whereas the CBDC is itself that entity.
I would like to add, Michael.
Yeah.
Yes, Alipay focuses for now mostly on RMBs, but Alipay as a business has the world as a client. So it's no longer only RMB. At the end of the day, you can go to New York and buy dinner at a restaurant there, paying with Alipay, and immediately the money is going to be transferred to a bank account in dollars, for example. So Alipay, yes, it's definitely the custodian of initially of currency in the world, but nonetheless has the potential now to reach not only to the 1 billion people in China, but also to the 6-7 billion people in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So yes, it's a great example of how electronic payments can work in a country as developed as China.
And Mark, are we seeing sort of in terms of fintech being integrated more into careers? What's the Russian education system? How is that sort of integrating financial technology into its curriculum, if at all?
Yeah, I think this is one way to see the student in many ways jump ahead. Other
Seems like we're also
financial technologies, they're spreading out through the Russian economy, but they're doing it from a almost, you want to say, a or a grassroots level, and it is the university system and the government in general that is adopting it later. I wanted to add slightly to the side, from an international relations perspective of this moving forward, both with the way that China is handling the actual pandemic and with the way they're pioneering economic recovery with this movement to a sovereign digital currency. China is now assuming the position of the leader of the world. We've seen a dethronement of the hegemon from the U.S. from their failure to address this and to lead the world out of it. And you're seeing a resurgence in all types of propaganda, the kind of blame game, and all kinds of accusations coming out of the US, UK, and other European governments against China are trying to, I think, put a little bit of a kibosh on this, trying to slow this down. But I think we're going to see this as a watershed moment, not only for financial technology and technology in general, but in international relations and the world that we enter.
Okay. It seems like we're still experiencing some audio issues with Mark. Can't hear him that properly. I want to ask another question and throw it out, the final question to all of you guys, in terms of RMB internationalization. What does the rise of financial technology and perhaps CBDC mean for the internationalization of the yuan? I mean, Mark was talking about China perhaps taking on the mantle of global leadership. That means the RMB has to be more international as well, right? I mean, how big of a game changer is CBDC to RMB internationalization, Professor Chang?
No, I think it's a big deal. I think, as Mark pointed out, I think it's a watershed moment. I think, first of all, the opportunity for it to become a financing tool all along the Belt and Road. And of course, it's not just Belt and Road, but I think that will be a critical strategic target. And the ability for us to be able to do financing there without entering, and importantly, without entering the local Forex economy is very, very important. We're talking about a lot of developing nations there, whereby, we see certain amounts of, sovereign risk and what have you. And I think the ability for firms that are going to invest over there or to deploy money there, the ability to be able to do it through the CBDC in a, as I said, a pseudonymous way without necessarily entering into formal banking arrangements on the other end. But furthermore, again, very, very importantly, the ability to trace and ability to be able to say, look, we know this has to go to do this, and it won't function if it doesn't go to do this. And we will be able to see every pocket it goes into. I think when you start to talk about graft and all of the other issues involved in investing in emerging economies, you can just imagine how many of them can be summarily resolved just by using a new tool. So I think it's going to be actually a huge a hugely important tool, pushing forward internationalization. And then once, of course, all of these countries are using RMB in its digital form, then comes the obvious use then of it as a reserve currency, because so much of commerce relies upon it. And so all the additional steps are sort of fall into place.
Edgar, real quick, I mean, is CBDC, is that going to really sort of pressure US dollar dominance?
Well, let me give you an example. I think China is definitely on the way to become the only superpower in the world, but that's still a long way, 2,100.
2,100.
At that moment, probably we won't be alive, but that will
you never know with
when
technology these days.
Will be buying Chinese bonds to act as reserves, and not the other way is still happening today. So yes, we're moving into that direction. In RMB will eventually become more important than the dollar, but definitely it's not just the currency. It has to go along with the country, obviously the progress, economic progress, political progress, social progress, and also the credibility that it's going to be gaining in the world to achieve that level. As I said, it's still in 80 years.
All right, Mark, final word to you real quick.
Yeah, China's showing us the way forward. As a Russian citizen, I want my government to bandwagon on this. They're showing us a tool to help get out of this crisis, a light out of the end of the tunnel. And whatever the Russian government, I want it to adopt it sooner rather than later, and make sure it's transferable with this new Chinese. I think it will become a global currency.
Okay, we are going to leave it there, gentlemen. Thank you so much for a very fascinating discussion. Professor Charles Chang, Deputy Dean of Academics at the Fanhai International School of Finance at Fudan University, as well as Edgar Perez joining us here from Beijing, and Mark Sloboda joining us from Moscow. Thank you to you all, as well as thank you very much to our audience online, wherever you may be. So this was part 2 of our 3-part special series in terms of how financial technology can be used to mitigate the economic fallout from COVID-19. Part 3 of that series, we're going to be talking about how businesses can cope, can manage from this, one of the biggest crises that we've seen since the Great Depression. So do tune in for that. We're going to have that 3rd part of the series on the 21st of April, next Tuesday at 9 p.m. Beijing time. So do tune in for that. And of course, CGTN Think Tank, we will be continuing to partner with institutions all around the world to bring you more thought leadership in terms of China and the world and how we can tackle through this COVID-19 crisis together. All right, so look out for more great stuff from our end. But for now, this is Michael Wong from Beijing. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you.